project manager on the consulting team working with California State Parks. We're excited to have you with us today. And just so everyone is aware, this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the project website at www.planhungryvalley.com once the meeting is completed. At this time, everyone has been placed on mute, but there will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. And our agenda for today includes the items you see on your screen. First, we are going to provide an introduction to the project team and describe the purpose of the meeting. We'll give an overview of the Hungry Valley General Plan update, describe the findings of the EIR, and finally provide an opportunity for questions. Now I'd like to pass it to Katie Metro with California State Parks for an introduction to our project team.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Katie Metro. I'm the General Plan Project Manager for California State Parks at our headquarters in Sacramento. We have other state parks team members here. We've got Eric Taylor, Associate Park and Rec Specialist, Russ Dingman, Great Basin District Superintendent, Chris Hahn, Great Basin District Senior Environmental Scientist. We have Jairo Avila, District Archaeologist, Lori Ware, District Interpreter, John Cunningham, Chief Ranger. In addition to Valerie from our consulting firm ACOM, we have Kara Friedman, Senior Project Manager, Paula Pena, Air Quality Scientist, and Melina Mallory, Environmental Planner. The purpose of today's meeting is to inform agencies and the general public about the EIR findings for the general plan update. It will inform on how to submit official comments for the EIR. Additionally, the meeting will allow for an opportunity to ask questions on the EIR findings and the proposed project in general, as well as any other questions regarding the general plan update. We'd like to remind folks that for comments to be formally considered part of the administrative record during the comment period, they must be submitted in writing. Verbal comments today are not part of the official record. Additionally, instructions will be provided at the end of the presentations on how to provide those comments. What you see on the screen is a high-level step-by-step process for completion of the general plan update and in EIR. The completed steps in the process are shown in gray. We are currently on step 6, which is in red, and it's identified to be the preliminary general plan and draft EIR. And if I haven't mentioned it, EIR stands for Environmental Impact Report. The upcoming steps that are shown in orange and the opportunities to get involved are noted with a light blue outline of a star symbol. I will now send it over to Valerie to provide an overview of the general plan update.
Great, thank you, Katie. As part of the process, we thought it was important to explain what a general plan is. It's a long-term planning document which guides future development and enhancements of the park. The general plan are adopted for California State Parks units to establish long-term vision and goals, as well as identify potential management, potential improvements. General plans also direct future management, resource stewardship, and public use, and identifies opportunities for future acquisitions. Hungry Valley SVRA General Plan was originally prepared in 1981. There are new laws and guidelines to consider, as well as the land that has been acquired since 1981. It's important to respond to the changing conditions and new technologies and establish future policies to guide park management. In the present phase of the project, we have drafted the updated general plan. The general plan update is formatted in accordance with State Parks Planning Handbook and is comprised of various chapters that provide a framework for resource stewardship, and the listed chapters are identified on the screen here. Chapter 1 provides an introduction to Hungry Valley SVRA, its location, background, and history, and purpose. Interagency and stakeholder involvement is also described in this chapter. Chapter 2 details the existing conditions of the park, including significant resources, land use, facilities, recreation interpretation programs, and park operations. Chapter 2 establishes the baseline against which future change is evaluated. Chapter 3 relies heavily on input from the public, regulatory agencies, and other stakeholders to identify issues and opportunities within the park. The Hungry Valley General Plan update process had incorporated numerous public workshops, surveys, and outreach efforts to obtain valuable input from the public. Chapter 4 incorporates the feedback received from the public, defines the future improvements within the Hungry Valley SVRA, identifies a preferred alternative, and establishes goals and guidelines for ongoing park management of the preferred alternative. The map here is our existing conditions map, and the general plan update starts with identifying the existing conditions of Hungry Valley SVRA. The different land use areas of the park are color-coded and include trails only in the yellow, distributed riding are in brown, native grasslands in light green, oak woodland natural preserves in dark green. The acquisition area at the top left is shown in light blue. You'll note that the existing amenities and facilities are also listed on the right side of the map. The next map shows the preferred alternative. The preferred alternative was identified through the numerous public workshops presenting various concept alternatives, surveys, interviews, and staff identified the necessary improvements. The preferred alternative includes existing defined land uses and incorporates improvements within those elements. The proposed site element improvements are included under access and circulation, facilities, camping, recreation, and amenities. A few things to note in the general plan update is the inclusion of the 845-acre acquisition area now identified as the Condor Mesa area. Proposed trails and trails connections are identified as well as a as a community event area and a proposed new RV campground within the acquisition area. New proposed operation support offices in the northern portion of the park, a new visitor center in the southern portion of the park, various electric vehicle charging stations, and automatic payment systems at entrances, and road repaving. I'm now going to pass it to Kara, who's going to go over the environmental review process.
Thanks, Val. I'm Kara Friedman with AECOM, and I'm going to walk us through the CEQA requirements that are required of this project. CEQA is an environmental law that applies statewide to projects that have been identified with the potential to have an effect on the environment. A general plan update is considered a project under CEQA, and that's why we're going through this process now. In this case, the lead agency for CEQA is the California State Parks, and the final decision-making authority rests with the OHMBR Commission. The purpose of CEQA overall is to inform agency decision makers and the public about the potential of a project to result in any significant environmental effects. As part of that, it's required to identify feasible ways to either avoid or reduce significant impacts, including mitigation measures or different alternatives. This provides an opportunity for the public and agencies to review the environmental analysis that was performed and provide comment on that environmental analysis. On the next slide here, we're going to look at the overall EIR process that occurs under CEQA that we're in the middle of right now. The first step is the notice of preparation, and that includes a public scoping period that was done previously for this project. After that, we took into account those comments that were received and we prepared the draft EIR. That's the document that has been published and is now out for public review, which is the period of CEQA that we're in right now. We're in the public comment period that's open for 45 days and will continue through October 2nd. And as Katie started to mention, that's really the purpose of this meeting today, to provide information about the general plan update and the EIR, and to allow you to ask us questions about that environmental analysis that took place within the EIR. We know that folks have lots of questions and comments about other things related to Hungry Valley, all the ongoing efforts to make sure that the park is back open and recover from the fire that swept through. But that's not really the purpose of our meeting tonight. There's other channels in which you can get that information, and we'll provide that to you because we know there are lots of questions and it is a big deal. But tonight's focus is really on questions that will help you review the general plan update, or the EIR, which is the CEQA process that we're in the middle of right now. So the next steps, once public comment is over and we've received those written comments, and maybe I'm going to jump back real quick regarding the meeting tonight, because we're really just receiving questions about the EIR, and that's the purpose of the meeting. Tonight's comments and questions that are received from the public are not considered part of the final administrative record. To submit an official comment, you need to do that in writing, and there's multiple ways to do that. Again, that information and those methods will be provided to you later. So just remember that if you verbalize comments and ask questions tonight, those are not being recorded as part of the final administrative record. And so once we're done with the public comment period on October 2nd, we'll move on to preparing the final EIR. Part of what that includes is preparing responses to all the comments that were received and determining if those comments require some more analysis or changes to what was presented in the draft EIR, which then will become the final EIR as those revisions are made as necessary. Once the EIR is final, it will be released, and at that point, it will go to the OHMVR Commission, and they will make their decision to certify the EIR or not, and then also take action on the project itself. This next slide talks about the EIR topics that were evaluated in the draft EIR. These topics are in alignment with CEQA and Appendix G, which provides kind of a standardized list of the resource areas that need to be evaluated. There's 17 topic areas here. There's a couple that were not included in this list because they were ruled out as not having impact. They're still addressed in the EIR, just not a full analysis. So these are the 17 topics that were fully addressed in the EIR. And then it includes the required CEQA sections such as growth inducement, the discussion of cumulative impacts, different alternatives that were considered, those impacts that were found not to be significant, and then also a summary of all the impacts. And our next slide lists all of the actual findings. Here we go. There's the slide. The findings, just a brief overview here of what was determined in the EIR, the conclusions that were drawn. You'll see that the only topic area that's not included here is air quality, and we're going to talk about that later. That was the one topic area that was found to have potentially significant and unavoidable impacts. It's important to note that the analysis that was performed in the EIR was based on the consideration of the conceptual design for the facilities in the general plan update as best we know them at this time, and along with the goals and guidelines that are provided in that general plan update and how those would affect the potential impact on the setting and on the environment. All the statutory requirements that must be followed and implemented are also considered, such as like the wildlife habitat protection plans, soil conservation plans, and other routine best management practices that are implemented at Hungry Valley SVRA. As I mentioned, the EIR identified one area with significant and unavoidable impacts, and that was to air quality. So at this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Paula, who is one of our air quality specialists, to discuss that impact.
Thank you, Kara. So based on the assumptions on increases in OHV activity and the proposed features of the general plan update, we evaluated the air quality impacts of implementation of that general plan update. So based on the size of those proposed facilities and activity, the project would result in significant and unavoidable impacts related to air quality, specifically fugitive dust emissions and the associated valley fever health risks. So I'll go over these details in the next two slides. But for the air quality analysis, the project area does traverse 3 different air districts: the South Coast Air Quality Management District, the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District, as well as the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. The team met with Ventura County and San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control Districts to get concurrence on the analysis and our methodology, and really get their input on the impacts we were seeing and our proposed mitigation measures. The air quality analysis evaluated impacts associated with both construction and operation of the general plan update. So construction emissions for all of the proposed site element improvements were quantified and compared to the applicable air district thresholds. We found that construction emissions would not exceed any of the significance thresholds, with the exception of the nitrogen oxides, also known as NOx emissions thresholds, for the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District. However, these emissions would be reduced to below the threshold with implementation of mitigation measure AQ1, which is the fugitive dust reduction control measures, and AQ2, which requires Tier 4 construction equipment to be used for certain project features. So the overall construction impact analysis was less than significant with mitigation. On the contrary, though, for operation, the air quality impact was determined to be significant and unavoidable. Operational emissions from the increase in OHV activity were also quantified and compared to those thresholds. This resulted in an exceedance of the PM10 fugitive dust thresholds, and the analysis unfortunately did not identify any feasible dust control that would be possible across all the riding areas in the SVRA, just due to the nature of park activities, OHV riding, the terrain, and the limited water supply in the area. In addition, because of the project location, fugitive dust emissions are also correlated with a potential increase in valley fever health risk. So we proposed mitigation measures AQ3 and AQ4 to implement measures to increase awareness of valley fever health risks and limit exposure to valley fever. But even with implementation of these valley fever health risk control measures and fugitive dust control, impacts would remain significant and unavoidable, just due to the inability to completely limit fugitive dust emissions across the park. So I'll pass it back to Katie, who will now describe how to provide comments on the draft DIR.
Well, thank you everyone for taking the time to join the public meeting tonight. I wanted to describe some of the ways to provide public comments. You can send a written response to me at this address that you see on the screen. It's a PO Box 942896, Sacramento, California, 92496. Written responses can also be emailed to me there's an interactive comment form available on the project website at www.planhungryvalley.com. And so you can do that, fill out that form and submit the comments there. And then you can also email the comments to info@planhungryvalley.com. Just a note about your email address. We will be putting together the final environmental impact report, which will have all of the comments. So just make sure that your email address is you're okay with your email address being shown in a printed form. So that's just something sometimes people don't think about when they're sending stuff in. Okay, so we were going to move on to the question portion of this presentation. Just to note, as we've discussed previously, discussions today are not considered formal comments and will not be included in the administrative record. So please submit those comments in writing. Next steps. Okay, we will talk about the next steps in the planning and environmental review process. State Parks and the planning team will collect official written comments on the draft EIR through the end of the public review period, October 2nd, 2025. Following the receipt of the comments, State Parks will prepare and incorporate the comments into responses into the final EIR and will make any revisions or updates to the plan. Finally, the general plan update and final EIR will be brought before the OHMVR Commission for consideration, and it looks like that will be in February of 2026. This concludes our presentation. Thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it over to Melina.
Thanks, Katie. So we will now take questions that you have about any of the information that was provided to you today. Please use the Q&A function in the ribbon on the bottom of your screen to write your questions indicated with a question mark symbol, and they will be taken in the order they are received. If you'd like to ask a question verbally, please use the raise hand function, and you will be directed when to unmute to provide your comment. If you have called into this presentation, please press *9 to raise your hand. You will then be prompted to unmute yourself and provide your comment. And to do so, please press *6 to unmute. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A box or any raised hands yet. All right, so we have a question from the Board of Directors. Who drafted the general plan update? Val, if you could answer that question.
Yes, and that was prepared by AECOM and State Parks.
All right, it doesn't look like there are any other questions rolling in. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, so we have another question also for you, Val. So does CEQA have to do, so CEQA has to do with an EIR by law, correct?
Yes, the CEQA process, because this is considered a project, CEQA does have to be performed. So we have to take a look at, based on the project is the general plan, and so we look at the potential for environmental impacts from implementing that general plan. And it gets a little tricky when you have a planning document as opposed to just a, brick and mortar project. So what was analyzed was the proposed changes from the existing condition, and then those goals and guidelines that are used to implement those changes.
So I'm not seeing any other questions. If anyone else has something to ask.
Well, I know that the meeting is scheduled to go to 7, and we will stay on the line until the end of it. It looks like we actually do have one more question that did come in.
Yes, for Paula, they're asking if the only significant impact was air quality.
Yes, that's correct. The only significant impact, significant and avoidable impact was related to operations for air quality. Construction was less than significant with mitigation. And
go ahead, Paula.
I was just going to elaborate on that. Significant and unavoidable finding was related to fugitive dust emissions and the associated valley fever health risk.
And I was just going to add to that. I know if folks are familiar with environmental impact reports that there tends to be more than just one significant impact. Because the general plan is set up with goals and guidelines, it's almost self-mitigating, and it's really a management document, and there's actions in the document that reduce the impacts to sensitive resources.
So we have another question. What about stormwater in regards to construction? Val, if you could answer that.
Sure. Because the projects are conceptual at this time, we did our best for projects that we knew would be similar to current projects that have already been built, and we analyzed those. But if at the time of construction and the project were to differ from what was conceptually analyzed, then at that time we would go back and do additional environmental review.
And maybe just to add to that a little bit, the EIR discusses all of kind of the standard, sometimes they're called BMPs, best management practices, that will be implemented during construction activities, as well as specific policies and guidelines of the updated general plan that require, the control of stormwater runoff, construction related runoff, and the different regulatory requirements that exist that are in place and required no matter what, plus those that are very site specific to Hungry Valley and the issues that we know come up with erosion and different needs to be addressed through that manner. So the EIR lists out all those things that would be taken into effect, both standard regulatory requirements as well as state parks requirements of, within their soil conservation plans and different policies and regulations that apply to water control and that type of stuff on site.
And so with those best management practices, we were able to conclude that the impacts were not significant. However, in the case of air quality, even with mitigation, it was considered unmitigable.
Okay, so our next question is, which of the 3 alternatives can be used, and can all of them be used? Val, if you could answer that.
Sure. Right now, well, when we drafted the general plan, like I said, we went out to the public and there was several concept alternatives that were identified. And based on public input and feasibility of certain projects to occur, that's where the preferred alternative was created. If at the time when the EIR goes before the commission and they choose a different alternative, then we would have to determine whether state parks wanted to go forward with that alternative or not. Did you have anything to add, Kara?
No, I think that covered it. You're right. The alternatives are all included in the EIR so that there's a comparison base between the project as proposed and how different alternatives would have similar or more intense, less intense impacts. That gives decision makers and the public the ability to see the different alternatives that were considered and how they would then differently affect the different resources in the area. And like Val said, the one that is included in the EIR is the one that came out of all of the public meetings and public involvement and was analyzed as the project under CEQA. But yes, at this point, they're all, they're still on the table.
Okay, our next question. So the preferred alternative is education of valley fever because of fugitive dust during projected operation. Paula, if you could answer that.
Yeah, sure thing. So, no, not exactly. The preferred alternative was one entire proposed site plan and proposed features and elements that made up the preferred alternative. There was and from those proposed site elements, we analyzed the impacts of construction and operation of those elements. And due to operation and increased OHV activity that would generate fugitive dust, and kick up the dust that potentially could contain the valley fever spores is what leads to the potential valley fever health risk impact. So we identified mitigation measures to reduce that significant impact associated with valley fever health risk. But because of the nature of riding areas and you can't completely eliminate the potential for fugitive dust, those mitigation measures aren't enough to completely eliminate the risk for valley fever. So that is why we have a significant and unavoidable impact. Let me know if that answers your question, and I'm happy to clarify.
And it may also be helpful to Paula, if we can go back to the map that shows the preferred alternative, and then maybe folks can get a sense of that was what was analyzed in the EIR. Thank you. So as Paula mentioned, the various elements and then the activities were analyzed for construction and operations.
And I think maybe it's also worth noting that in the EIR's analysis of the various alternatives, the air quality impacts aren't quantified to the exact same extent as the proposed project, but it's likely based on the differences within those alternatives compared to the proposed project that they would still end up obviously creating fugitive dust, maybe at a slightly lower or increased amount. Because this was the significant impact that was identified for the project, SVRA requires you to try to find alternatives that lessen that impact. And so that's really what the alternatives do, is try to lessen that impact, either through different reduced areas, different reduced development areas, things like that. But this is an impact that would likely run across all of the alternatives. Different mitigation isn't necessarily available dependent on alternatives, simply due to the nature of the site. And as Paolo explained, just the inability to water the area or apply some kind of treatment that would help reduce that dust.
Thank you for your comments. Like I said, the meeting does run till 7. Folks are more than welcome to stay on. We can continue to answer questions. People can also drop off, but we will be on the line until 7 o'clock.
Doesn't look like we have many attendees on the line. We're down to 3. So just wanted to let everyone know and be respectful of everyone's time to let you know that we're not seeing any new raised hands or questions coming in. And also remind you that this meeting is being recorded and the plan is to post the recording on the webpage.